The way it came about is this little organization of attorneys wanted me to speak to their group of 20 attorneys at their annual meeting about environmental stuff. And then the guy called me back like 2 weeks later and said, so I'm sorry, but we have to cancel because there are people who've said that they will destroy our organization if we have you. And honestly, no hard feelings, but I don't give in to bullies. So I show up, and fortunately, we packed the front rows with DGR people. So there was a barrier between me and the Trantifa, just screaming, shouting, and that person would flop down on the ground and start screaming like they'd been assaulted. They were playing radios or setting off stink bombs. The night before, I'd had this idea. If I get really mad at them, I'm gonna just list out some of the pro-pedophilia stuff in queer theory. I'll turn it into a fun thing by playing queer theory pedophilia Jeopardy. If they really piss me off, this is what I'm gonna do. And then they did. They just wouldn't shut up. They wouldn't let me give my talk. So finally I was like, okay, you want it? Here's what we're gonna do. There is a long correlation between anarchism and pedophilia and support for pedophilia. Wait. That's a beautiful line. Thank you so much for asking. How about something relevant? I've been talking about rape culture all day, and pedophilia and the support of pedophilia is not rape culture?
He's a rape victim.
And I stand with him. Anybody that's against him, because I'm a rape victim.
Okay, so actually, it seems you're acting like this is a spurious connection. So we're going to play Jeopardy. Answer. Argued for the eradication of age of consent laws as in down to infants.
Who is Foucault?
Thank you.
Okay, next one. The author of the founding document of queer theory.
Who is Gayle Rubin?
50%. Question is?
The amount in that article that was a defense of pedophilia, specifically, quote, boy lovers, so men who fuck boys.
Since you're not believing me, quote, this is in the founding document of queer theory. Like communists and homosexuals in the 1950s, boy lovers are so stigmatized that it is difficult to find defenders of their civil liberties, let alone for their erotic orientation. That's in the founding document of queer theory. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm using facts.
You're exclusionary, you're not a revolutionary, and
Okay. You know, it's really interesting. It's really interesting that when I actually start talking about the relationship between queer theory and anarchism and pedophilia, that it becomes, they really want to shut me up now.
Okay, Derrick, I'm thrilled that you're here. I'm thrilled to be speaking with you. I've been a fan of yours for years, real years.
Me too.
Yeah. Okay, you got two fans here, Derrick. What I'd love you to talk about, if you're interested, is, I suppose, to me, what's very kind of important to our discussion, we talk a lot about trans and the wider impact of it, would be anarchism and queer theory and the early roots. And so that, like, after this hour, that we have a good working connection between the three, if you follow me, from anarchism over to queer theory, over to trans. And I'm very interested in the kind of, I suppose, the extraordinary push to get rid of social norms, the kind of defecate in the theatre kind of concepts. So if you can kind of enlighten us on where I'm coming from with all these questions, we'd be delighted.
So in my book, The Culture of Make-Believe, I did something that I'm really proud of, which is I predicted the rise of the sort of insane right. And what I was talking about is as economic systems collapse, people start doing some crazy things. And I was very pleased with myself for predicting the rise of the sort of insane right that we see. And the thing that I missed completely in that book, in that book, was received very well. And the thing that I missed completely in that book is the rise of the insane left. And so in about 2012, I decided I was going to fix that. And I was going to write a book about what was going wrong with the left, and also what were some of the big problems in anarchism, because I saw the problems in anarchism and the problems in the modern left to be sort of a bit coincident, a bit in the same line. And that book was held by the publisher for 5 years, and then because I criticized queer theory in it, they severed their relationship with me. And so if you criticize the insane right, you do very well. If you criticize the insane left, you lose your career. And my analysis of anarchism is that there has been a battle for the soul of anarchism going on for more than 2,000 years. And that battle is between those who recognize that those in power make rules to support those in power and to facilitate their maintenance of power. That would be sort of one brand of anarchist. And that includes almost everybody. Because, I used to do talks and I would say, so I don't know what to do next. Let's pretend we're in a real democracy and let's have a vote. And then after you vote, I'll just ignore you and do whatever I want anyway. And everybody would laugh. We recognize that there was, I don't remember who it was, but there was someone who wrote this great line about it's a democracy theme park where we can all push the buttons and hit the levers, but they're not attached to anything. Oh, a great example of this. I love this example. So 1992, before the big Rio Earth Day event or the big Rio Earth Summit, an assistant director of the United States envoy or whatever to that event came touring around the country. And when he got to Spokane, everybody in the audience, when we had the public speaking, everybody said, development destroys wild nature. And there is no such thing as sustainable development. There's, we all said the same message. And then at the end of the evening, the ambassador got up and said, thank you so much for supporting the United States position on how sustainable development is the direction to go. And not a single person said that. And then the interesting thing is I talked to the organizer afterwards, and the guy from the government had been so drunk that she'd had to help him to his seat in the first place. So this is just the best example I can think of sort of public input. Or one more example, and we all know that if you ask people, does the government take better care of human beings or corporations? Everybody laughs. It's just everybody knows it takes better care of corporations. Okay, so on that level, everybody should be an anarchist. It's like we all understand that. And there's this thing called Dunbar's number, which you can't really have a participatory democracy. You can't have a non-representative democracy, but instead of a personal democracy where everybody has a say, with numbers larger than like 120 people. It just becomes infeasible. So in any case, we all understand humans evolved in these small communities. That's how we can have governance systems that actually work at a small scale, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so, and that's not even adding in all the stuff about if you have something like mining, that means that you have to have a military to steal the land. You have to have a police force because once you've smelted the ores, they're worth something. And so somebody's going to steal it. And so the technologies will require certain, ask yourself, are cities made for cars or human beings? It's like the technology drives. So there are some anarchists who understand all that. And the problem is, and this goes way back, is there is another set of anarchists, and they are another school of anarchism, and they are, and often have been in the ascendancy, and they make what I think is a ridiculous assumption, which is that because those in power make rules for those in power. Therefore, all inhibitions on one's personal behavior are oppressive, are inherently oppressive.
Yeah.
And that is completely nuts. So I'm writing this book about anarchism and how there is this conflict for it, or conflict for the soul of it. And again, the sociopathic ones, really, the ones who want to violate all social norms, have really been winning for 2,000 years. So there's not even a battle, really. So I'm writing this book, and I come across a couple of anarchists who are explicitly pro-pedophilia. One of these was Hakim Bey, who, he wrote a poem called My Politics, which is about sexually abusing a boy in a bathtub. And you couldn't get more clear than, his stuff is openly pro-pedophile, pro-incest, just really disturbing stuff. So it's him, and then what was at the time the largest anarchist magazine, Anarchy, a journal of Desire Armed, put out an entire edition that was completely pro-pedophile back in the 90s. And so I'm thinking, well, that's pretty awful. So then I do a internet search for anarchism and pedophilia, and the book kind of exploded because there are so many references to it. This is not some sort of spurious connection. The guy who translated Max Stirner, John Henry Mackey, I think, he wrote a whole bunch of books. Sagitta was the series about the importance of men raping. He wouldn't call it that. Young boys. There's Benjamin Tucker was one of the most important American anarchists around the turn of the 19th to 20th centuries. And he argued that the age of consent for girls should be lowered, I think, to 12. So then, up until 2012 or so, I'd heard about queer theory, but I didn't really know what it was. I just thought it was like, oh, queer, that means be nice to gay people, don't be bigoted. And I was late to this party because, of course, feminists have been talking about queer theory since 1980, second wave feminists. 1983, I think, is when the term is when Gayle Rubin wrote the sort of founding document. So since the early 80s, they've been pushing back against it. Queer theory is something completely different than just lesbians and gays and people, bisexual people, whatever. It's different than all of that. It is a completely different politic, and it's based on, and this is what they say themselves. This is not me. I'm an old school lefty. I'm not, particularly right wing. I don't know what I am at this point. But this is not. This is their language, not mine. That they say, like I said a moment ago, that all social rules are inherently oppressive. And I agree that many social rules can be considered oppressive. And we could have intelligent discussions about which of those social rules we think are good for society or bad for society, or we think are good for the individual, bad for the individual. We can have intelligent discussions about that, but that's not what queer theory does. What queer theory does is say that all social norms are inherently oppressive. And now let's step back for a second. Okay, so I know someone who says that basically history is just the same characters wearing different costumes. And the modern queer theorists really are nothing but Diogenes the Cynic 2,500 years ago.
Wow.
And Diogenes, okay, so the Cynics didn't mean that it wasn't like, college freshmen being, oh, I'm so cynical. It's not, they're really cool. So that's not really what cynicism, capital C cynicism means. It is a school of philosophical thought that has some good points. So when I was in college, I was enamored of Diogenes and thought he was great because he said things like, one day he was drinking, one day he was washing clothes or washing something, washing turnips. He was washing turnips in the stream, and somebody came up to him and said, if you learned how to suck up to those in power, you wouldn't have to wash turnips. And he responded, well, if I know how to wash turnips, I don't have to suck up to those in power, which is pretty cool. He really developed the language around, we don't own our possessions, but they possess us. And he once said that one of the happiest days of his life was when he saw a dog lapping out of a stream, because then he wouldn't have to carry a cup anymore. And he's in that sense, he's kind of like Jack Reacher, the fictional character. He doesn't want any possessions. He doesn't want to carry anything. He slept in a tub. And, Jack Reacher makes this argument in all those books of I don't want a mortgage. I don't want to carry enough clothes that I have to wash them, because then eventually I'm going to end up with a mortgage and tied down. And so there is this sense of freedom. And I love this thing that probably didn't happen, which is that supposedly Diogenes was sunbathing on a hillside, and Alexander the Great supposedly walked up to him and said, if I could be anybody else in the empire, I would be you. So I'll give you anything you want. What would you like? And Diogenes supposedly responded, you're standing in the sun. Could you move over a little bit? And so that's pretty cool. But then also, he thought that all social norms were oppressive, which is basically just an excuse for him to be a sociopathic jerk. So, for example, he would beg, and then when people would give him money, he would insult them, or he would spit on them, or he would masturbate in the public market. Gosh, when have we heard about an ideology that talks about public sexual presentation? Anyway, he would masturbate in the market, and when people said, "Oh, that's disgusting," he would say, he would rub his belly, and he would say, "I wish that I could sate this hunger as easily by rubbing as I do this other hunger." And he's like, and he would poop in the public theater. And again, when have we seen an ideology that has people pooping where they should not be pooping? At one point, enemies were outside the gates, and everybody is preparing defenses. And he ran around pushing a tub everywhere, saying, "You all are busy, so I should pretend to be busy too," and acting like all their preparation of defenses was no more important than pushing a tub back and forth across the street. So basically he's making fun of everybody all the time. So another place we have to go with this is all gonna tie into
I can't wait.
trans issues too. There's Plato, somebody else whose name I can't remember right now, and Antisthenes. And they were having argument. What made me think of this is also there's the famous thing with Diogenes where Aristotle, I think, well, I don't know, one of those ancient Greek dead guys, said a human is a featherless biped. And so Diogenes brought in a defeathered chicken and said, "Ha, behold the man." And it just cracks me up, because it's the same sort of logic we see from the trans activists all the time, is that they just do this stupid definitional stuff that doesn't actually make any sense.
If Diogenes kind of almost gave birth to anarchy, did it gain any movement? Did it gain traction? Like, was there a serious movement way back then? Because I had kind of understood it as much newer.
Well, Diogenes is famous enough to get, a page in an 8-volume encyclopedia of philosophy. So,
Wow.
count that. We've heard his name 2,000 years later, but
Okay.
so he's a little bit famous. But it never became anything, because it is inherently, if all social norms are inherently oppressive, nobody wants to be around you, and you can't build a movement. You can't build a movement because there is no, because a movement implies we're all moving together toward an end, but it's completely 100% individualistic. And I want to bring in the Antisthenes thing, and then we'll get rid of the ancient history.
Go ahead.
So the Antisthenes thing is Plato thought that there were horses, and then there's also this Platonic essence of horseness that is out in the universe. Wow. So there is the thing, that you are a woman, and then there is this Platonic essence of womanness that is in the universe that would exist even if there were no women.
Oh.
Okay, I don't really agree with that, but it doesn't matter. The point here is that Antisthenes instead argued, and this has to do with the trans thing, Antisthenes argued, well, it kind of fits in there with that too, but Antisthenes argued that there is no category horse. He said, a horse I can see, horseness I cannot. So he would say that if you see 5 dogs or 4 dogs in a room, you're not actually seeing 4 dogs because there is no such thing as the category dog.
Yeah. Yeah.
What there is this dog, this dog, this dog, this dog. So there are no categories at all. Really? And so the way that applies is that, I mean, I can see what you said about the Platonic essence. There's this Platonic essence of womanhood that could get transported into me.
Yeah.
And then also there's Antisthenes on the other hand saying that, basically there are as many, quote, genders as there are people. And because there is no essence of anything, there is no commonality between dogs, between horses. So no, it never became a particular movement, but it would keep popping up periodically through the centuries as people with those personalities.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then we come up. I want to get back to queer theory. The queer theory emerged in, like I said, 1983. Gayle Rubin wrote an essay in which she's arguing that sex itself is oppressed, and that all of this stuff is just terribly black and white thinking is what kills me. And then they accuse everybody who disagrees with them of black and white thinking. But it's very black and white thinking. So the basic argument is, at one point in history, in fact, for many times in history, homosexuals would be oppressed and homosexuality would be considered to be criminal, deviant, however you want to put it, was not okay. So she argues, by analogy, that therefore all forms of sexuality are inherently oppressed, and that there is no distinction between good and bad sex. Now, I would argue that we need to have social discussions about what forms of sexuality we think are acceptable or not acceptable or morally acceptable. I think we need to have these discussions. Okay, so is it okay if I go another direction for just a second?
Yeah, go ahead.
So when I wrote my book Endgame, one of the things I was doing is I was going after sort of unthinking dogmatic pacifists, people who, I did other things too in the book, but one of the things is that I was talking to someone once who said, I will never kill any living being. And I said, oh my gosh, how do you defecate? Because every time you defecate, you kill a lot of bacteria. I mean, so I was getting into a big fight one time with this pacifist and I tried to make my position clear. It's like, most of us, most of the time, would agree that it is morally acceptable to do an act of violence to a carrot. Because when you eat a carrot, you're killing the carrot. So most of us, from the carrot's perspective, that is an act of, you're killing the carrot. So most of us, most of the time, would perceive that as morally acceptable, right?
Mm-hmm.
So at the same time, most of us, most of the time, would consider it to be immoral to do an act of violence, to kill a human being. Most of us, most of the time. And we can argue about cases. Was it okay to execute Ted Bundy? We can, and I think those are really important social discussions to have, is where do we personally and socially draw the line on what forms of violence we find acceptable. I mean, clearly, collectively, we are not particularly finding the murder of the oceans to be unacceptable because we're doing it. So I think that there are important discussions to have. And I think it's ridiculous to say, I will never kill any living being under any circumstances. Well, good luck eating. So it's the same thing with sex, that I think that there are important discussions to have about most of us, most of the time, find this form of sexuality acceptable. Most of us, most of the time, would find this form of sexuality not acceptable. Like, I think most of us, with the exception of Michel Foucault and others, would find it morally unacceptable for a 25-year-old, I'm going to use neutral language, for a 25-year-old to have sexual interactions with a 1-year-old. Most of us would find that morally unacceptable. The reason I put Foucault in is because Foucault argued for the eradication of age of consent laws, as in down to infants.
Yeah.
And much of Gayle Rubin's, I always hesitate to say the name of the essay because it's one of those mind blocks. It's either thinking sex or talking sex. I never can remember which. So I always just say her essay. Anyway, about 50% of that is a defense of pedophilia. So what queer theory is about is destroying everything that is normal, especially having to do with sex. But whatever is considered normal is considered oppressive. And it's pretty funny because queer theory has been so successful that within about, so it's some academic whose name I don't remember, in about 1991, she really pushed for it to be accepted within academia. And by 1993, or 1994 somewhere, it was so normalized within academia that she had to denounce queer theory because queer theory had been normalized. And of course, it's against everything that is normal. So it is in itself unstable. Just ask me any question you want. We can go whatever direction you want.
I've got a couple of questions. I mean, one is, how can someone like Michel Foucault, who not only argued, for an age of consent of 12, but also, has a record of pedophilia, who actually, it seems pretty certain that he did, in fact, abuse young boys. And in addition, was kind of pretty open about some really extreme sadomasochistic practices. How can he end up being such a huge intellectual force? I remember when I used to work in a high school, they would cite him approvingly in pedagogical texts, and I was just sitting there thinking, this man is disturbed. I don't understand how that happened. He's a star for many people.
Well, that's the thing, is two things. One is that I often think there are so many humans on the planet that I am not surprised by the existence of somebody like the Marquis de Sade or like Foucault or there are so many people. There's going to be some people who are, you have any bell curve, you're going to have people way out at some end. So my problem isn't so much his existence. And my problem is that he is a single most cited scholar of the late 20th century.
Exactly.
And it's an interesting question because I don't actually blame Foucault or I can't stand them, but I don't blame Foucault or Rubin or Butler or any of them. I don't think that had they not existed, there would be no queer theory. Because I think queer theory, just like I started with, under certain systems of economic collapse, you can predict what certain parts of society will do. Like, the rise of the insane right that I talked about and the rise of the insane left, which I wasn't really allowed to talk about. And I think really that Foucault, Rubin, Butler, all of them are part of a backlash against the rights of women and the rights of homosexuals. Because like in the United States, they get rid of chattel slavery in the American Civil War. And because the underlying ability to exploit and the underlying need to exploit the black people in America, that led to Jim Crow laws. We can't do it one way, we're going to do it another way. And
Yeah.
if there is a hatred felt in society, and one manifestation of it is stopped, another manifestation is going to arise. And so my parents got divorced when I was 10 or so, and my mother was not able to get her own credit card for a while. This is actually within my lifetime. Did women get the rights? I don't know about single women, but divorced women gained the right to have their own credit card in their own name, like 1972, 1973. So this is very recent. And only recently did women get the rights to have sports of their own. And only recently, relatively recently, did women get the right to vote. Only relatively recently did women get the right to have public restrooms, or the participation in public life that implies. And when the underlying cultural collective hatred of women continues, it's going to manifest. It's going to find a new way to manifest. So at first, in the sports, they would just simply, they wouldn't fund it, or they wouldn't allow it. We've all seen that famous picture of the woman running the Boston Marathon, and the judge is trying to run her down. And so that's sort of the first round. And then, but once women do get the rights, nothing has changed socially. I mean, things have changed, obviously, socially. There weren't battered women's shelters in the 50s and 60s, for example. But that underlying hatred of women and collective, actually, I think contempt is a better word. The underlying contempt for women will find a new way to manifest. It will find new ways to sneak in. And Foucault articulated that hatred of the body. I'll say one last thing, and then which is that Foucault, queer theory, are in many ways the quintessence of patriarchy. I mean, there is this violation imperative that runs patriarchy and has from the beginning. There's a great line that Richard Drinan said to me about men's basic womb envy, which I know that I think it was Karen Horney who really developed this. But I think anyway, if woman can create life and I can destroy it, who is the more powerful? So that's one of the things that's been driving patriarchy from the beginning is you shall not put any limitations on my behavior. And if you do, then I will violate them. And that's how I show my strength. And that's what queer theory is.
Yeah. I suppose there's a couple of things. I think it was Karen Horney who came up with womb envy. And I suppose in a way you could argue that, let's say you go back to the Diogenes and he just had some sort of free, individualistic, extremist spirit that he wanted to do what he wanted. And then you could say, if you move it on into queer theory nowadays, maybe it's to do with a kind of an anti-mother thing, if you follow me. It could be a kind of, you won't tell me what to do. A very childlike kind of attitude. I'll defecate in the theatre. I'll do whatever I want. Mm-hmm. But what I suppose that's just a passing thought. What I'm actually interested in is, why did Gayle Rubin leap on Foucault? Foucault was off on one, and we all know that. We get that. But why did the likes of Gayle Rubin decide to, devote, and I think it was called Thinking Sex, her essay, 50% of it to pedophilia and to, was it boy lovers? Was our kind of our thing, the kind of freedom for men to have boy lovers? What was driving her? What the hell was she thinking?
What we know is that she and Pat Califia were in an S&M sex club, in the same S&M sex group in the Bay Area for a time. Oh. So we know that she either gets off on inflicting or receiving pain. I don't know anything of her background, but I would argue either unmetabolized childhood trauma. We know that Foucault did not have a good childhood. Either unmetabolized childhood trauma where you end up eroticizing the domination, or, I mean, that's too facile to say that's true in every case. So, or I don't know what else is wrong with her. I don't know. One of the things Leah Keith talks about this, that one of the smartest things, I think she got this from Andrea Dworkin, one of the smartest things that patriarchy has ever done is to combine the drive for power and the sex drive. And when you get, I mean, nature's pretty smart, and nature made orgasms feel good for a reason, just like it made sugar taste good for a reason, because it's high energy. And, if sex was a drag for everyone, there would be no reproduction. So it was a way of socially rewarding, not socially, of physically rewarding this behavior and helping to create bonds, et cetera, et cetera. And there's this language that somebody introduced me to many years ago that I really like, which is to talk about toxic mimics. And a toxic mimic takes the form of something and perverts the content, changes the content to a different direction. So if you've ever read Ray Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451, they talk about the TV walls and how the protagonist's wife talks about how that's her family. And television is a toxic mimic of community. And nationalism is really sort of a toxic mimic of community in a sense. But really, one that cuts the heart of things is that rape is a toxic mimic of sex. It has the same sort of physical action is happening, but the content, the intent, everything about it is completely different. It is traumatizing instead of affirming.
Following that thought, I mean, so queer theory, which pretends to be a liberation movement, is actually a movement of oppression, or it does the exact opposite of what it kind of pretends to be doing.
I think collectively what it does is it gives traumatized people and also gives sadists both, because I think that's part of it too, gives both traumatized people and sadists an ideological rationalization to continue acting out their trauma, as opposed to. So another story I want to tell. I was driving cross country back in 1985 or something. It was the middle of the night, and the only thing you listen to is AM radio bouncing off the stratosphere. So you get these weird. And there was this talk show that was going on 3 a.m. I'm driving across Wyoming, and it was Dr. Harvey Rubin. I remember the name. Anyway, this woman calls in, and she says, "So I got this question, which is, I was dating this guy, and we broke up because he wanted me to dominate him during sex, and I didn't feel comfortable with that. And so then that's all fine. And then I saw him on the street like a year later, just walking different directions. I said, how you doing? He said, I'm doing great because I found a woman who will dominate me during sex. So I'm really happy. And she said, I'm just curious, Dr. Rubin, what do you think? Do you think he's really happy? And, because I still kind of care about him. And his answer could never be said today, but I thought it was so right on, which is, we don't know. Complementary sexual neuroses do not make a sound basis for a relationship. And now he would be kicked off the air. She would be considered this prude who is kink shaming. And she would probably receive death threats and harassment, might lose her job. And the hero of the story would be the guy. I mean, the punchline of that story was what he said about complementary sexual neuroses are not a way to run. And I don't think sexual neuroses are a way to run academia. I don't think they're a way to run politics either.
So much of gender theory and queer theory seems to me just like an unconscious confession of a sexual fetish and a sexual fantasy. And we had a young man on here on the show named Johnny who transitioned young. And in him telling his tale, it felt to me at least so clear that he was kind of being guided along a certain path so that he could, in a sense, manifest the sexual fantasies that other adults had of him.
What is the sort of logical consequence of children, or the physical consequence of children who have reached the age of the chronological age of consent, but who did not go through normal puberty? I want to bring in one more thing here having to do with the sort of hatred of the body. That is one of the guiding principles of society for the last couple thousand years has been something called the Great Chain of Being, which is God is on top. God is pure mind, no physicality. And then angels, and then humans are a battleground between mind and body. And then animals don't have a mind. And then plants have even less of a mind. And it's a scale from perfection down to complete corruption. And we can go, oh, that's old, that's who cares. But it still manifests in so many ways in society. I'll just say a couple of them real quick and then I'll get to the point. One of them is when you think of the greatest inventions ever, presumably you think of the wheel, the lever, gunpowder, the screw, the pump, whatever. What about metabolism? How about sex? We never think of those because those were invented by nature, which means that they weren't invented at all because there's no mind in our ideology. Same, what are the most beautiful pieces of art? Beethoven's Ninth, Mona Lisa, Sistine Chapel. That's great. What about birdsong? That doesn't count. Nothing counts. Nothing. And it's the same with this. This goes to patriarchy because women are obviously the creators of life. This is Karen Horney again. Women are obviously the creators of life. Well, so as a dude, I can accept that my role is to basically protect future generations. That's why I've got a brow ridge. I'm supposed to stand between, to go back to the beginning of the conversation, I'm supposed to stand between the mothers and babies and the bears, or mothers and babies and other men for that matter. And there were these guys wrote this horrible book in the 90s called Demonic Males, where they would talk about how because men are bigger and stronger, women would necessarily evolutionarily learn to bond with the strongest male, the one who, it's sort of the caveman idea that the woman gets carried off into the cave and then she has that man rape her instead of all the men rape her. So it's in her best interest, they argued. I completely disagree. Because humans didn't evolve as individual animals. Humans evolved as social creatures. And so Lear talks all the time about how when buffalo are threatened, they'll make a circle where the calves and mothers are in the center. And then after that comes the sort of teenagers. And then after that comes the females without calves. And on the outside, protecting all of them, are the bulls. Males are essentially sexually almost irrelevant, where we play a very small role in that. And our job is to do something else. Indigenous people, it was a really interesting book, Peggy Reeves Sanday, Female Power, Male Dominance, where she talks about why some cultures are high rape cultures and some cultures are low rape culture. That's not the point right here. The point right here is that among all these indigenous people that she discussed, if anybody, like a task that was almost always male was to be an envoy or a trader long distance. And the reason is because it's really dangerous and you might not come back. And if the male doesn't come back, it doesn't really matter because you still have females to reproduce. So the point here is that one of the ways that this manifests today, this great chain of being. Oh, so anyway, the dudes, if we know that women actually make babies, if we're fine with that relationship, that's great. If we're fine with the fact that we basically are not crucial to that. But if we don't recognize that, if that makes us feel inferior and we don't want to feel inferior, then we have to find ways to make sure that we're better than females. So maybe we're smarter than females, and because I can't tell how smart you are because I'm not inside your head. So I can make this argument that men are smart, women are stupid, and that it all leads to this stuff. This is again Karen Horney with the womb envy stuff. But anyway, where that comes to here is that, remember, the mind is what's important and the body's not what's important, which is one reason we're killing the planet. How does this fit into trans? Because what a man thinks in his head is more important than what the body shows.
Oh.
What we think in our head is the great chain of being just brought up to the current day. What a man thinks in his head is what's important. And what happens in any of our bodies is trash. It's contemptible. The bodies are dirty. The bodies don't matter. All that matters is the head.
To me, it sounds like the Cartesian split as well.
It
like
is. Absolutely.
A thinking self and a material self, and one is privileged over the other.
Yeah. And the truth is they're not separate.
Can I bring it back to queer theory and how did it get out of the gate? Because if somebody writes an essay and 50% of it is pro, and could you tell us about this? Because a lot of our listeners won't know about this. They won't know this boy lover push that was really quite significant. So could you tell us a little bit about this? And also, how did it gain traction? Or was it always theoretical and people enjoying ideas? And, it took a long time to get traction.
Well, I don't know what a long time is because she wrote it in 1983 and now it controls academia. And
yeah, true.
So is that a long time? Is 40 years a long time? I mean, in a lifetime, that's a long time, but in society, that's not very long. Okay, so first, she actually said, this is pretty close to a quote, that basically, like communists in the 50s, boy lovers have a hard time to finding anyone to argue for their free speech rights, much less their sexual orientation. So she was very much rah, all of that. And, Judith Butler actually wrote in one of her books, and Judith Butler is, I think, the most famous queer theorist of today. She actually wrote in one of her books that we may need to rethink, to use her word, the prohibition on parent-child incest. And I don't understand any of this because she wrote this and she wrote a couple paragraphs about how prohibition. So the argument is this, that all sex is good. And the shame associated with incest or with adult-child sexual interactions comes from the social stigma that is placed upon them. And the kids actually like it. And the kids, they've argued this too, that the kids initiate the majority of these sexual contacts, they say. But see, when she was confronted by some Brazilian parents, when she was giving a talk in Brazil, she was confronted about this statement. And she said, I never said that.
Yeah.
I don't know how that works because it's in your book. And I mean, I've said some crazy stuff in my books. And if people would confront me about it, I'd say, yeah, I don't agree with everything I wrote. She could easily have said that was a thought experiment that I was playing out, but she didn't. She denied she wrote it.
But is that what it was, though, Derrick? Was it a thought experiment? Because it feels like it when I read it. It feels like thought experiments. I know it hasn't enacted like that. It's gone into the reality. But when I read it, it feels very conceptual and theoretical and playful almost.
Okay. I have, in my own mind, changed the famous anarchist comment, if I can't dance, I don't want to be part of your revolution, to if I can't laugh, I don't want to be part of your revolution. So good. I like making jokes about anything. I would have a hard time playing with the concept of parent-child incest.
Yeah.
And if I were to do that, I would put so many caveats around it that it's but the thing is, whether she meant it as playful or meant it for real, the truth is that society has taken it up.
And just to clarify, could I just say, I didn't mean playful in that sense. I got the impression they were stretching their brains. They were conceptually playing with concepts, not in a playful way, if you follow me, that it was conceptual and theoretical. Maybe I've got it wrong, but that's how I've read the Gayle Rubin, the Judith Butler. They're almost playing with thought experiments rather than actual in reality. But maybe I'm completely wrong. You certainly would know a lot more than I would.
If I wrote something that was meant to be playful and it was used later to rationalize bad behavior, I would need to say something. And what you say is true. Do you know who Daniel Quinn was? He wrote Ishmael. He was an environmental writer, but he was good. He did not condone violence in any way. And there was a crazy guy who went in and shot up a TV station and said that they got their inspiration from Daniel Quinn. In this case, Daniel Quinn didn't do anything. He never argued that you should go in and shoot up a TV station or anything remotely like it. So people are going to take whatever you say, no matter what anybody. I mean, we all heard those stories about the kids who killed themselves because they were playing Dungeons and Dragons or listening to Judas Priest. And, so I agree, but maybe I'm just too literal minded. But I found both Judith Butler and Gayle Rubin to be horrifying. And then the question is, which I haven't answered, how did it gain? So I read this book 30 years ago called The Psychoanalytic Roots of Patriarchy. Huge book. And the main thing I remember from it is that neuroses generally give people more energy than rationality. And I'm sure you've known people like this, that their issues they will do anything to rationalize their issues, and they will do anything to maintain. And those emotional issues are protected even at the cost of tangible harm to themselves. I mean, think about addicts. We've all known someone who has destroyed their life through some addiction or another. And there's a baseball player right now who just got arrested for betting basically on baseball and possibly throwing balls when he should have thrown strikes. And he's, at the very least, he's cost himself $20 million in future revenues, and he only made like $10,000 off this. And there's discussions in baseball world about, was he a gambling addict? Was he, what's the ration? I mean, he made what is rationally a very stupid decision. And we see this all over, and I think that given that society wanted a backlash against women, and given that society it's also true that on one level, we have more luxuries than an emperor 500 years ago. We have access to ice cream 24/7. We can communicate instantaneously around the world. We have luxuries undreamed of by any Roman emperor, by anybody in the past. At the same time, we are in a panopticon, and we are, as Foucault wrote about, and as others have written about, we are followed. Our movements can be tracked by cell phones, et cetera, et cetera. So there is this collective sense we have of being Big Brother is watching us at all times. I can watch this TV show. It used to be that you get it through the air. That's presuming you're going to watch TV. You get it through the air. Now, good God, Netflix keeps track of everything I ever watched, and Google keeps track of all my searches, and blah, blah, blah. So there's a sense in which we can all feel, oh my gosh, the system's closing in. Let's fight for some sort of liberation and freedom. And so we can all have this sense that we're being oppressed, but we don't know how to deal with it. And queer theory is one way for it to slip out. And I want to say this too about the left, that I think one of the reasons the left has gone so nuts is that effectively we've lost on equity between rich and poor. We've lost on labor issues. You know, back 35 years ago or 30 years ago, the left was against globalization, and now the left's for globalization. Environmentally, things are really bad and getting worse. Well, if I can't affect anything on the large scale, at least I can cancel a comedian. You know, at least I can have this personal purity I can have. And the personal purity can be the personal purity, the ability to do anything I want. There's this great line by Erich Fromm. He changed Descartes' I think, therefore I am, to I affect, therefore I am. And if I can't affect change on a big scale, at least I can destroy the life of a kid.
Yeah.
There is power somewhere.
Yeah, it's very like, you know, the poor person who has no power, and then they do something kind of cruel to the you know, the old lady that they're looking after or something. It's just, I'm going to have some power somewhere and I'll grab it. I said on the Substack that we were interviewing you and asked for questions, and somebody wanted to know about the deep green resistance. And I noticed a quote that I really enjoyed from yourself and Lear Keith. And Lear Keith, people will know as a radical feminist, but I like this quote. And it's either from you or her. Hands up everybody who predicted that when Big Brother arrived, he'd be wearing a dress, hauling anybody who refuses to wax his lady balls before a human rights tribunal and bellowing, "It's ma'am." That's from 2019. Good for you. Would you tell us about the deep green resistance before we finish? I'm sure, Bret, you have a question before we finish.
I want to say one thing about that line, which is I got a note from, I don't remember if she wrote it or I wrote it. I got a note from some guy who said, you know, I think I disagree with you on every single thing politically, but I have to acknowledge a good line when I read it.
It's a great line.
That's one of my favorite lines I've written, or that has been written associated with me. So deep green resistance, when I used to do a lot of talks before I got canceled, I used to, and that's another thing, I've written so much stuff that is really outrageous. Like, we need to bring down civilization because civilization is killing the planet. I expected to get canceled for all that stuff. I expected to get canceled for saying, you know, we need to blow up dams. It's like, there's all this outrageous stuff and nobody cared. Nobody cared at all. And then what I get canceled for is A, saying women don't have penises, and B, we shouldn't force women to undress in front of men, and C, using the words of queer theorists themselves to show that queer theory supports pedophilia. That's what I got canceled for. It's just, it's extraordinary to me.
Can I ask, you know, there's a famous clip of you, and we'll put it in this video, it's brilliant, where you played Jeopardy with some students. And it's a whole lecture. The whole thing is really, really good. Where were you? What's the background about that? You know what I mean? It's a very gripping kind of clip from today. If you wanted to show somebody in 20 years, what was it like? That's what it was like. You talking to those students. Give us the background of that.
Well, that was such a great example of the anarchists. We haven't really talked about Trantifa. That was really a great example of Trantifa and the anarchists being hoisted on their own petard, because that clip has been seen literally millions, maybe even 10 million times. It's been seen a lot. I'm known for that more than writing 28 books. And the way it came about is this little organization of attorneys wanted me to speak to their group of 20 attorneys at their annual meeting about environmental stuff. I said, sure. And then the guy called me back like 2 weeks later and said, so I'm sorry, but we have to cancel because there are people who've said that they will destroy our organization if we have you. And I said, okay, that's fine, no hard feelings, but I just want to be clear. We're clear on two things here. One is that you are an attorney who is like saying you're canceling me because of threats, and so this isn't the country with the First Amendment. You're giving into those threats. He said, yes, I'm fully aware of that. And so again, the second thing I want to make clear before we go is you are a group of environmental attorneys who are trying to fight like Weyerhaeuser and big timber companies. And just to be clear, if you can't stand up to a group of 20 or 30 guys who pretend they're women, then good luck taking on some of the biggest capitalist corporations on the planet. He said, I am fully aware of that. I am aware of every bit of hypocrisy here, but we don't want to lose our organization. We don't want this organization destroyed. We do good work. And I said, well, yeah, I'm sure you do good work, and that's great. And honestly, no hard feelings, but I don't give in to bullies. So immediately I called the library, and the libraries in the United States have to give, if they rent to anybody, they have to rent to anybody pretty much. Okay. And so they couldn't cancel me. And so I showed up. I mean, I set it up, and then there was going to be 40, 50 people show up, or 60 people, whatever. Plus we were going to live stream it. We did live stream it. There was maybe 300 or 400 people watching the live stream. It was just going to be about, I was going to talk about the murder of the planet. I was going to talk about men's abuse of women. I was going to talk about just the stuff I always talk about. And so I show up, and fortunately we packed the front rows with DGR people. So there was a barrier between me and the Trantifa, and they were just screaming, shouting. I had the microphone right here, so you can't tell. They couldn't hear me beyond like row 2 or 3. And there was a woman who brought her children, and she left because she was afraid for their safety. I'm sure you know this better than I, because soccer is not a big deal here, but there were lots of those soccer flops where like somebody from our side would like shift his feet, and the person next to him would be a Trantifa, and that person would flop down on the ground and start screaming like they'd been assaulted. They were playing radios or setting off stink bombs, and cops showed up partway through, and they pulled me out of the room, and they said, okay, we've made a deal with the library that you can get your money back if you just stop now. And I said, no, I'm not stopping. I came here to do a talk, and I'm doing a talk. And if you clear the room, I'm doing a talk to an empty room. If you drag me out of here, I'm doing a talk outside. I don't care. I'm not giving in to these bullies. And by the way, and they kept saying, they have a First Amendment right to give their opinion. And I said, no, they have a First Amendment right to rent the room. That's how the First Amendment works, because the First Amendment includes the right to be heard. You can't shout down someone who is talking. That is not how free speech works. How free speech works is I get to talk, you also get to talk, and I don't get to shut you down.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I went back in, and I kept trying to do my talk. And fortunately, the night before, I'd had this idea of if I get really mad at them, I'm going to just list out some of the pro-pedophilia stuff in queer theory. And then I thought, well, I'll turn it into a fun thing by playing queer theory pedophilia Jeopardy, where instead of saying them, I ask a question, like the show Jeopardy. And so I just had this idea the night before. They're like, if they really piss me off, this is what I'm going to do. And then they did. They just wouldn't shut up. They wouldn't let me give my talk. So finally I was like, okay, you want it? Here's what we're going to do. And I had no idea that this was going to end up going completely viral, but it cracks me up, because had they just kept their mouths shut in the first place, I would have done a talk that nobody would remember to 20 people, 20 attorneys. And then if they would have just kept their mouth shut at the other thing, there would have been 300 or 50 people in the audience and 300 people on live stream. And as it is, this thing has, it gets repeated everywhere. It has done more for my career than all of my books put together. It's funny.
That's what I was thinking. You've written like 30 books, and you're probably more known as the Jeopardy guy. Yeah.
I know. Life is weird. So Deep Green Resistance was formed because when I would give talks, one of the questions I would ask is, do you believe that we will have a voluntary transformation to a sane and sustainable way of living? And nobody would ever say yes. And I said, okay, that's great. So if you don't believe that we're going to have a voluntary transformation to a sane and sustainable way of living, and you care about wild nature, what does it mean for your strategy and your tactics? And the answer is we don't know. And the reason we don't know is because we don't talk about it. And the reason we don't talk about it is because we're all so busy pretending we have hope that it's going to magically transform when we all know it isn't. So Deep Green Resistance was about, okay, so if we don't believe that, what are we going to do? If we don't believe it's going to be a voluntary transformation. And for crying out loud, I mean, you work on these issues more than I do, but if you really want to not believe that we're going to have a voluntary transformation of a sane, sustainable way of living, don't look any farther than the trans issue. Because I can't believe that when the oceans are being murdered, that we're actually having to fight that male boxers and MMA fighters were allowed to compete in women's competitions. I mean, this is just the fact that, and thank you for rubbing your face like that, because that's if I didn't have glasses, I'd do this. It's like, how are we having to deal with and to deal with women who have been raped having to talk about being raped by her penis? It's like, how is this even a conversation? And how did it get big? The only thing I can think of, there's this line by Germaine Greer that I think about quite a bit, which is, I'm gonna butcher it, but it's basically, women have no idea how much men hate them. And I mean, of course, I'm not saying it's not all men, but collectively, it's like there is so much. So my book, Culture Make Believe, the first title, or the title that my publisher wanted to put, was Beneath Contempt, because it's really, there's a line in there that really affected me deeply. That was, I was trying to figure out the relationship between perceived entitlement, exploitation, and atrocity. Like, why were there more Black people lynched after slavery ended than there were before? I couldn't figure out. And then I came across this line by Nietzsche, which is, one does not hate when one can despise. And so long as one's entitlement is not threatened, so long as one's able to exploit the other with no impediments, one merely despises the other person. One merely looks down upon them. And when your entitlement is threatened, that's when the claws come out. And women have been fighting really hard to not be under men's heel. And so it doesn't surprise me at all that there has been increasingly dramatic and violent backlash to that from many sectors. And then add to this, I love, and she didn't actually say this, but this condenses like a paragraph, where Andrea Dworkin talked about how right-wing men sort of consider women to be private property and left-wing men consider them to be public property. And that explains pornography to me, the left support of pornography. And also, you can't get any more public than having left-wing men own what it is to be a woman. That's very much left-wing ownership, male ownership of women. And so how did it get to be so big? I think because it struck a chord. How did any movement? So Jimi Hendrix could have played his exact same stuff in the 1920s, and people weren't ready for it. He would not have been the hit he was. That artists and writers and movements take spark when there is, it's like the Buddhist line, when the what is it about, when the student's ready, the teacher will appear. So society was ready for Foucault. And add to all this that we live in this increasingly meaningless world, and also a world where simulation is increasingly replacing reality. They've done studies of teens in early 20s in the UK And if they had a choice between losing their cell phone and losing a finger, a significant portion would lose a finger. And there are people, they've done studies of this too. Total deal breaker for me, but they've done studies of what percentage, just a significant percentage of people check their cell phones during sex. Total deal breaker for me if that were the case.
Jesus Christ.
I was like, and this is, we are, and this is what the whole thing about, cutting off the women, cutting off their breasts and getting, things attached to their groin. That's not functional. This is the simulation replacing the reality. We think that because it's a simulation of it, that it's real. And this is where it's not just in sex. I'm going to say something fairly graphic, but I think it's a really good analysis. I first was really introduced to the Society of the Spectacle reading Randy Schilt's book, And the Band Played On. Fabulous book about the AIDS crisis in the 1980s in San Francisco. And the band that's playing on is partly the federal government not attending to the crisis. And it's also, Randy Schiltz was gay and was part of the bathhouse community. And he was appalled at the fact that the homosexual community was not responding to the crisis either. They were continuing to play on, that they refused. They said, look, we got out of the closet. We're not going back in the closet. You can't shut down bathhouses. And the point is, at one point he's describing something in a bathhouse. I won't give the real details, but he describes an extreme, he describes some guy has his arm up to here inside another person's anus. And he asks himself, so how can this happen? And what he said, and this was my introduction to the Society of the Spectacle, it's like, I got it immediately. When you remove emotional content from sex, it will start to get boring. And it has to get bigger and bigger. The emotional stimulation, if the emotional stimulation is gone, the physical stimulation has to increase to maintain the same level of interest. And we can see this with sports. At one point, it was enough to go to a baseball game. Now you got to have a jumbotron. You got to have instant replay. You've got to have, all this other stuff.
Yeah.
And it's the same with any of the stuff. It's with porn, that porn adds to so much of this that, at one point it might be enough to see, and this is harmful in itself, don't get me wrong, a woman standing naked in a field of daisies. And then it's got to be pushed, and it's got to be pushed, and it's got to be pushed, because that gets boring, because there's no emotional involvement, no emotional interaction.
Arguably, when they brought in contraception, it arguably took a lot out of the sex act, if you follow me. Because before that, when you were having sex, you might have a baby. And that would put a lot of energy into the situation that was taken away, really, by contraception.
Yeah, I agree. And that's another problem I have with Emma Goldman, frankly. She was talking about, the importance of free love. And she was sterile. It was like, yeah, it's easy for you to say when. So, yes, it's very interesting that I've seen really good arguments about how the so-called sexual revolution really harmed women. So anyway, the point is that we collectively are failing to understand that the strange costumes in Hunger Games in District 13, that was a critique. That was not actually showing what we want.
I don't know if it's a question or a comment, but you talked about how, simulation or simulacra is kind of surpassing reality. And it just made me think specifically of how I have heard certain trans-identified people talk about the body, and they will talk about their body specifically as it looks, as an image, as other people might see it. So it's become like a representation. It's the body as object and image. It's not body as what I feel, like what I feel in my genitals, what I feel in my gut, what I feel in my neck. It's like not the phenomenological body that we live through as much as that thing that I can see in the mirror. And, it seems like the same thing happening again.
okay, I'm not blaming the people who came up with the great chain of being. Like if they would never have thought of it, nobody would. But it's just such a perfect manifestation of the whole cultural desire and the cultural contempt for the body and the contempt for, which Karen Horney might argue comes from the fact that the body came from a woman. I think some of it too, I know this is not really answering your question, but I know some of it too, I think comes from the fact that we die. And I think we are offended. We understand that everybody else has to die, but I think we're offended that we have to die.
Yeah.
And that fear leads to sort of a hatred of what is, of the fact that, you know, it's kind of interesting. I broke this finger stopping a dogfight a few years ago. And that's what happens with life. You know, you start off with a finger that's like this, and you end up with a finger like this. And then, you know, the same thing happens with other parts of your body. I mean, I didn't used to wear glasses. And oh my God, I used to have long hair because it wasn't all wiry. But now that I'm going gray, it just goes up and it never lies down. So now I got it like all the old rock stars. I have to cut my hair short now. I think that the notion of what you're talking about is kind of a techno version of heaven, as opposed to in our bodies.
Wow.
That's transhumanism.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's the same thing. That's the great chain of being again, except that machines are at the top. Disembodied machines are at the top instead of a disembodied God. Yeah. You know, what we haven't really talked about this, but one of the things that breaks my heart, I mean, I get really angry at a lot of the trans stuff because of the harm it does to women. And it's just that makes me really angry. But another thing that makes me angry and breaks my heart is that I read about so many about young people who are having their genitals mutilated. And I am personally not a violent person, but if somebody would at 20 have cost me orgasms for the rest of my life, like somebody would pay. It's like that is, you only get, as far as we know, we only get one life and you only get one body. And this finger, you know, is this way forever. And, you know, there's other various things in our bodies, and this happens to all of us. It's just part of it's part of what happens in life. But to artificially interfere with someone's ability to have an orgasm. So, and I'm not arguing, I'm not doing the Gayle Rubin thing that all sex is. Hey, it's interesting. I wonder if Gayle Rubin, I wonder if some of that's DARVO too, because she said sex is repressed, but really what is harming sex? I mean, well, I'm sorry to have opened this door with 30 seconds left, because
go on, open it. I can't resist it.
I don't know where to go with it, but it seems really clear to me. I mean, it's always seemed clear to me that queer theory is profoundly, even though it claims to be body loving, they don't use the word love though. It really is. It really is. It's Orwellian, and it's sort of a DARVO in that.
Some of our listeners might not know DARVO.
DARVO is
attack. Okay.
Reverse victim and offender. Yeah, it's something that abusers do all the time. It's like, so I had dinner ready an hour ago, and where were you? You didn't show up. And then the abuser would go, "Wow, you're always late. You're always making me do things." It's classic. I think I want to tell another story. You know, earlier I said that there are a lot of the pro-pedophile people will say that the children have initiated the sexual contact. And there's a sense in which, of course, they're just lying, and there's a sense in which it's kind of true. And I'll tell a story about that. I was in my 20s, and my brother-in-law and I were going to go to the dump. And so we got in his pickup, and then one of his daughters sat, like a 6-year-old daughter sat in between us, and a 4-year-old daughter sat on my left leg. And then a friend of the 6-year-old daughter, a 6-year-old friend of hers, sat on my right leg. And I had babysat enough to have had, kids squirm all over me, and, that's all fine, whatever. But the 6-year-old, she sat so that she could like square herself on my leg, and I could feel her genitals through my pants and her pants. And also she was rubbing my fingers. I've had kids play with my hands, but she was doing it in a really sexual way. And I didn't know what that meant. I was too young and naive. So all I did is shift her so she couldn't do either of those things. And then I understood what was happening about a month later when the news broke in town that she was being sexually abused by her brother. Because I'd been around enough. I'd been around my nieces, and they never did that. And so either A, she was acting out as she had been taught by her brother who was raping her, or B, she was in some way attempting to tell the trauma story. Or both. We can some mix of that.
Both.
And my point having to do with the DARVO is when she's defending, they call it boy lovers. That's the only time they talk about love, really. Yeah. And what we're talking about is adults raping children. And that does two things. One, it, in the child's mind, does more than this, but one of the things it does is conflates power differential with sexuality, because they have no power in this relationship. And the other is that it affects, we'll use a value neutral word for now, their sexuality for the rest of their lives. Yeah. And it can link sex and fear. It can link love and fear. It can de-link their own connection to their own bodies and sex. But the point is that, I have known so many women and men whose sexuality has been profoundly, who later in life made many sexual decisions and non-decisions that they would not have made had they not been sexually abused. Something I have a book that's done but hasn't gone to the publisher yet, in which I talk more about the abuse. And one of the things I talk about is how glad I was that I'm a male. And there, of course, as a male, I get benefits from society, blah, blah, blah. But what I'm really talking about there is I was trained as a child to not say no. And had I been a female, there is a very good chance that I would have physically participated in a lot of sex I didn't want. Because that's one of the things you learn as a victim of abuse, is to not say no. And fortunately, being a male, there were fewer females who were as sexually persistent as perhaps some men may be. And so my point is that with the DARVO is that she's pretending, Gayle Rubin was pretending to be all positive sex posi, but I think something that really harms the sexuality of children for much of the rest of their lives is not sex positive. I also don't think that all sex is positive. I think that there are types of sex that are, like Harvey Rubin said back in the 80s, it's not that there are manifestations of sexual neuroses. And what needs to happen is that people need to try to metabolize those and become no longer the 7-year-old in a 40 or 50 or 60-year-old body, but instead to do the work to grow up and to
Integrate.
Wow. What a
Thank you.
conversation.
Yeah. So if people want to find your work, you're author of 28 books. Clearly you have a few books on the way. And I presume they go to the Deep Green Resistance, or where else should they go to find you?
They can also go to derrickjensen.org, DERRICKJENSEN.org.
Cool.
And I've got a bunch of essays there, et cetera, et cetera.
Are you on Substack or anything?
Yeah, I do have a Substack. It's my name. I don't know how. And yeah, it's kind of a cool thing. I've got this thing. I've been doing it since 2003 or so, where people can read my books in progress. Like as I write them, I'll put them up that night, so they can actually.
How cool!
Yeah, it's kind of cool.
Wow, God forbid I did that.
Do they give feedback?
Oh God, no.
Okay.
No, I don't want feedback, because I'll write something. I mean, you write something, maybe your first draft of it is just crap, you know, and it's not. And also, you don't want to hear it's crap especially when you know it's crap. You don't want to.
But
you just throw it out.
Yeah, it would stop your creativity if people.
It does.
They would send you places. Thank you, Derrick. That was
thank
amazing.
you so much. I hope this was useful.
If you open the door, what will happen?
Let's go see.
Wow.
I call that one big.
Wow.
How crazy!
And then there's 3 of the 4 babies, and that's one mother.
Wow. Even with a mama there.
And will they attack you?
Oh God, no. No, when I get too annoyed at them, I come out and chase them through the forest.
Do you is that normal? Like, I don't know anything about bears. Is that normal, or are you a kind of bear man? Like,
They're very friendly and curious animals. See that other one?
wow.
All
Do
right,
you have
come here.
names for them, or is that a no?
The names are pretty boring. Like that one's Big Bear. One has a scar on his face, so I call him Scarface. It's just sort of identifiers.
Small
So my
bear.
friends will know who I'm talking about.
But they don't really recognize their names? Like if you say Scar Bear, is Scar Bear going to turn his head?
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't use their names to their face very often because there's no reason to, really.
Right.
Do you feed them, or do they come to you for food?
Yes, I'm finishing a book right now about taking care of my mom as she died. And then when I finish that book, my next one is going to be take all the arguments that people make why you should never feed bears and show that they're not really true. Like, they're not dangerous. I don't know if you saw the porch. They destroy everything, but they've ripped the porch apart. But then again, we've ripped apart their home, so it's kind of fair play.
Can I just ask one more question about that? But if I walked out to the bears,
well, that's a very interesting thing too, because they would look at you and then trot away. They know me from other people, and also if they see me out in the forest, they run away. So basically, they know that this is a place where we come together and nothing bad happens. And it was the same. I'll tell you one more story real quick. I'm in my mom's house now. She died 7 years ago. I had committed to living around her for the rest of her life in my 30s. And I lived in a little cabin in the woods out that way. My mom had always heard you never feed bears, but some mother bear dropped her baby off here, and the baby out-stubborned my mom, which I didn't think was possible. And so my mom ended up like, okay, here, I'll feed you. And then they ended up with a really long relationship, 10, 12 years or 10 years or something. That bear, whom my mom called Mama, disappeared. And we didn't see her for 8 years. And, they're wild animals. You don't know they could go somewhere else. They could be dead. Who knows? And then my mom got cancer. And the week before she entered terminal delirium, Mama showed up on the porch. And sat there for that week. And then when my mom entered terminal delirium, the bear left and never seen that bear again. So it was all pretty cool.
Do you think that the bear knew on some level what was happening?
Oh, yeah, I think so.